Hi guys, my name is Tim Conton. I'm the Artistic Director here at Goggleworks. Today I'm going to be in our fantastic wood shop showing you how we take some of these pieces of wood, a couple of nails, and a mason jar and turn them into a really cool candy machine. So let's prepare to make things happen. Alright, real quickly we're going to run through a couple of different pieces that come in the kit first before we start building. So first of all, we've got all these pieces pre-cut and pre-drilled, so those are where your nails are going to go. We tried to make it easy for everyone. Now there's a couple of things we want to keep in mind is that when looking at a piece of wood, the long streaks of wood that you see, the long lines that go the long way of the piece of wood, are called long grain. And then on a piece of wood where you see the rings from the tree growing, that's called end grain. And one of the things that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to crisscross our long grain as we build our way up so that we have end grain on every other piece of our stack there. That's going to help make our piece nice and strong. Additionally, you can see the way that I stacked it up. I have long grain running across the gap here. So when I'm jumping over the two pieces of wood, the long grain is going to be stronger. So that's a couple of notes on how we build it. Additionally, looking at my kit here, I've got my paint. I'm going to have the opportunity to paint this with some fun colors when I get done. And then there is one that's marked G. That is wood glue. We're going to use a little bit of glue in between the pieces to make sure that they stick nice and strong. And then I've also got a piece of sandpaper here. I'm going to start by sanding all the different pieces of my wood. So just one piece of sandpaper, it's nice and rigid so I can hold it against my fingers, and I'm going to go ahead and work across all the edges because you can see there it's a little bit rough where the saw cut across. Okay, I have all of my pieces sanded. You notice that when I was sanding, I took my piece to the edge of the table. That got my table out of the way and allowed me to really work on those edges. I really focused on the corners because those had the most splinters in it. And I know sanding's not a whole lot of fun, but I'll be honest with you, it's one of the most important steps because nobody wants a splinter in their finger when they go for a piece of candy. So take the time, do some sanding. Now, I am ready to start putting in some of the nails into my pieces and gluing that up. Remember, the glue is going to be the little G, and actually in your kit is a popsicle stick as well. That'll allow you to kind of apply the glue onto the pieces of wood. We don't need a lot of glue, honestly. The nails are going to do most of the holding for us, but the glue is just that little bit of reassurance. And then remember, we want to make sure that we cross hatch that long grain. So I'm going to take a second and do another dry run of sort of stacking it up. Oh, there immediately you see I didn't cross those long grains. So I am doing those cross pieces with the long grain, and then I'm going to stack this one up so that it's correct. And if you've ever heard the moniker, you know, measure twice, cut once, that's always the key with wood because you've only got so many pieces laying around. And you want to make sure you put it together right the first time. So we're going to take the extra time here to measure that twice. So that's going to be a perfectly aligned piece. Now you do have a little bit of an option here. Some people like to offset their gumball machine so it very clearly has a front and a back, and that way when they're getting their gumball out, they can kind of have, I don't know, a little ledge underneath their hand. Some people like to center it. I think I'm probably going to center mine today on there, and it doesn't have to be perfect, just going to get it close. Every once in a while I get a student that really likes to go crazy and they sort of offset at a diamond pattern all their own, and it is drilled so that those nails should still hit the bottom piece there. Kind of a funky version of it. So you can decide what you want your gumball machine to look like, or your candy machine. I'm going to make sure that mine is centered in there. So with that, we're ready to start putting in some nails. So I'm going to set these pieces aside very carefully, and you can see even I sanded the inside of the circles of both of my pieces. That's really important too. And we're ready to start attaching, piece 1 to piece 2 here. So I'm going to get out some of the glue and catch that on my popsicle stick. And like I said, it doesn't really take a whole lot of glue. I tend to do 4 little dots away from where my nails are going. I'm just going to smear it on a little bit with my popsicle stick there. So a dab will do you there with the glue. Then I'm going to center it up on this block. And then I can take a nail and drive that nail in. So the nice thing that we've done here is we've pre-drilled some of those nail spots. So you're not going to run nearly as much risk of your nails bending. But I also want to take a second to kind of show you why nails bend, because I do run into this the most with beginning students and younger students when it comes to nailing. So if you've not picked up a hammer before, this is a pretty good size hammer. This is your standard hammer. It's got a claw for removing the nails if need be. And then the hammer head here is for driving in the nails. And a hammer is, first of all, made to be used standing up. It's really important to kind of get your proportions right with the hammer. And then a hammer is made to be used with one hand. So a lot of times when I get students that are struggling, they'll use 2 hands. But the problem with using 2 hands with a hammer is that it's hard to get that hammer head to hit just flat with 2 hands. And so what ends up happening is those students using 2 hands, they'll hit at their nail, but you can see the head of the hammer is hitting at an angle there, and that's what ends up bending your nails. So what I recommend instead is using just one hand. You can hold your piece of wood in place with your other hand, which is really nice. The other reason why we pre-drill these is so that you don't have to hold on to your nail, so you don't run the risk of hitting your fingers, which is nice. Now, if this hammer feels way too big or too heavy, instead of holding all the way out at the end with your hand, you can move your hand up on the hammer, and that'll make the weight of the hammer head much closer to your hand and much easier to swing the hammer. So with that, if I hold it close, this might be a little bit loud, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a tap real quick. I can actually make sure that that hammer is landing with the head perfectly flat, and that's not going to bend my nails. So I'm going to take a chance here to go ahead and nail in this first piece, and then we'll take a look at adding our next row. Okay, so there I nailed in all 4 nails there. You saw I'm right-handed, so I held that hammer in my right hand. If I were left-handed, I would hold that hammer in my left hand. And remember, we want to use one hand so that that hammer hits nice and flat with the hammer head. Now, I'm working on a fantastic workbench here in our wood shop, and it is big and heavy and sturdy, and does not matter how hard I hit these nails. If you're working on, let's say, unfortunately, hopefully not the dining room table, but if you're working on a folding table or on a smaller table, you might not find that it likes being hammered on quite as much. So if that's the case, you might work on maybe even the floor. I do that a lot at my studio at home. I'll put the piece down on the floor where I can know that it's on a nice sturdy surface, and then when I hammer into it, all of that energy is going into the nail, and it's going to drive that nail home much faster. So that's how we go about nailing those pieces together. So the next piece, remember, I want to make sure that I turn my block so that the long grain is going the opposite direction on these pieces. Now for this one, you have a little bit of a decision. So we have a little space there and between those 2 blocks, and then also this middle piece is actually a little bit lower than these 2 outside pieces. That's going to help it slide really nicely when it's going in to get the candy, and then when it's dispersing that candy into your hand. What we want to make sure of is that that piece has enough space to slide. If we slam these 2 together, it would be so tight that it wouldn't be able to slide. But there's a thickness from the saw blade when we cut these out, and we can either go out so that it's smooth on the edges, that would leave a little bit more play in there, or we can go a little bit closer and step in from the edges, which might be, might not look quite the same, but might give it a smaller gap down there. Now, The way that I decide what I want to do here is I think about what am I going to put inside my candy machine. If I want Skittles, for instance, I want to make sure that that gap is not so big that a Skittle can fall down the side, because otherwise they would just empty down and fall out. If I'm doing gumballs, I don't have to worry about it. A big old gumball is going to fit just fine. It's not going to fall down into that gap. So be thinking about what you're going to be keeping in your candy machine. Think of your favorite candy and kind of go from there. I'm going to sort of split it halfway. I'm going to leave just a little bit of an instep. It might be a little bit noticeable, but I want it to be fairly close because I don't want any of my smaller Skittles or M&Ms or anything falling through. Now again, I'm going to pull this piece out, but again what we're going to do is a little bit of glue on those guys. Maybe I put 3 dabs on these ones. And then I'm going to set them down in there. And if you go to set these down and they rock a lot, this one's got a little bit of a wiggle in it, it's probably because your nail heads are sticking up a little bit too high. Take that hammer and give that nail head another whack and really drive it down home. If those are sticking up at all, they'll get in the way of these pieces. Now you'll see that we lined up the holes for these nails to not hit the nail on the lower section. That's important because otherwise you would run into it and it wouldn't go in anymore. This little wiggly one I think is going to work its way out. So now that I got those glued, I can nail in those nails. And again, I can put those nails in the pre-drilled holes. So I don't have to worry about bashing my fingers. And drive those home. Also in our kit, I'm going to take a second to look at my slider here. And in the kit comes these 2 little dowels, and those actually are drilled to fit right inside of there. And what those do is they make it so that when we're sliding our gumball machine back and forth, if we get too carried away, it doesn't slide out altogether and have all of our pieces drop out. So when these are wiggled in there, you can see that it stops it from coming out altogether and us losing all of our candy and making a big mess. So I did not sand those when I was sanding my other pieces. So I'm going to take a second real quick here. And really with those, I can just kind of wiggle them against. I just want to take a second to knock any furry edges off of them. So I'm kind of twisting it around, wiggling it around. There, and it kind of gets those edges nice and smooth. And then before I drive those in there, well, you can take the option. If you think you might want to pull things apart in the long run, you can really just tap them in. Honestly, they fit pretty tightly. Or if you want to make sure that they're super secured, you can use a little dab of glue on them and really drive them in there. But those are going to be key once we get our slider in. Don't nail the top on and build your slider off to the side, because remember, we need to, if we nail this top on, we need to slide that in first and then insert our pieces. So what I like to do, take a moment to put together your slider first. For these, I'm going to actually just dunk the very little end of them in my glue and wiggle them down in there. Maybe tap them with my hammer. Again, nice little dunk in glue. Just tap them in with the hammer. Saw it sink in there. Sorry about the noise there. Now those are going to be nice and secured, so I'm going to set them in here, and then I'm going to put my top on. That's going to slide nicely back and forth for me, and I made sure that my end grain pattern alternates. Great. So I got my last 4 nails in. This is all put together nice and strong. You can see I can pick it up and it doesn't come apart. I got a little bit of glue drying around the edges here, but that will dry in no time. Now I want to show you how to put the jar onto your candy machine. I've got a jar here with some fun gumballs in it, and if I try to just put the jar on top, I'm going to dump all of my gumballs everywhere. So here's the trick. You take your candy machine and you flip it upside down and put it on top of the jar, and then you can flip your jar over and you don't spill any of your gumballs. So now I've got that gumball machine put together. In this case, it's gumballs. If I put, M&Ms or Skittles, then it would be an M&M or Skittle machine. And you can see if I push that in, candy drops in, and I can get my candy out. So that's pretty great. But you can also take it a step further. In your kit, we include black, white, red, yellow, and blue paint. That's for you to design and decorate your gumball machine however you want.